Trump escalating and de-escalating. It's Trump's carrot and stick. The deal drives everything. Well, with 50-day clock ticking, what Putin's going to do is accelerate his military activity against Ukraine. They've got 50 days. That's a long time in Trump's diplomacy to try and sort things out.
We are very unhappy, I am, with Russia. I've been hearing so much talk. It's all talk. It's all talk, and then missiles go into Kyiv.
Putin does what Putin always does, and he carried out further attacks against Ukrainian cities, civilian targets. You're using drones, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. That's the standard reaction that Putin does whenever something happens that he doesn't like, and then he fills it in with further attacks at other times. Just before that, Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's representative in the United States, had made a statement suggesting that, or on social media saying that talking was better than threatening, and he put some peace-like emojis at the end of his post. But that showed that the Kremlin is concerned. And then Peskov has just come out, that's the Russian Kremlin spokesman, has just come out and said that Vladimir Putin will only respond in person to things that he thinks are serious, and he needs to consider what he's heard in more detail.
So in a nutshell, we're going to make top-of-the-line weapons, and they'll be sent to NATO. He's sending them weapons, and they're going to be paying for them.
Slack off, a pundit, a commentator coming out, throwing the nuclear word again. The Russians do this all the time. I think whenever the first one or two nuclear threats came out, Europe sat up and went, oh, this is scary here, we have to be really careful. But we've crossed so many red lines, and there's more nuclear threats thrown out. The one thing I can say is that whilst Russia's got a nuclear capability, and people talk of tactical nuclear weapons, Vladimir Putin will not use a nuclear weapon. I am certain of that, because the moment he does, he will lose the tacit support he's getting from China, India and elsewhere. There's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. That's terminology when it comes down to the START treaties, the international treaties for control of nuclear weapons, bits and pieces. The use of a nuclear weapon, even in a tactical scenario, will have strategic effects. And that will mean Putin will be so isolated that there's no way can he win this war. And therefore he's not going to risk that.
And we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days, tariffs at about 100%, you'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means.
The severe tariffs that Donald Trump announced were 100% tariffs on trade coming from Russia to the United States, but also 100% tariffs on trade coming from countries that are doing trade with Russia in areas that will help support his war machine. So, for example, countries that are buying his oil and gas. Two of the biggest are China and India. And what Donald Trump is hoping is that he doesn't have to implement those tariffs. Those countries will put pressure onto Moscow to give in and come up with some form of peace plan. They've got 50 days to work this. That's a lot of time for Putin to go right up to the wire and then try and get an extension. I don't think the Kremlin sees an opportunity. I think they want to sit back and look at what's going on. The Russian papers are basically saying, hey, we've got 50 days. Donald Trump changes his mind so quickly that we don't know what's going to happen. So sit and wait. And I think that's going to be the action from the Kremlin. Sit and wait and see if Donald Trump changes his mind. They'll be concerned about Trump authorising more US weapons, albeit supplied through EU countries or European countries to be supplied to the Ukrainians. It'll be concerned about any pressure that might come from these secondary tariffs, especially from China and India. But China and India haven't made any statements yet. So he wants to try and force his hand, and he's forcing it militarily, but the primary weapons that he's supplying are protective, the air defense weapons, the Patriot anti-air missiles, but also the best form of defense is attack. So he's giving Ukraine this wherewithal, or saying he's doing it, giving it the wherewithal to attack further, whilst at the same time trying to get this economic deal going with the threat of tariffs. And it'll take time before a lot of the weapons that have been promised to get into Ukraine. So there's a window of opportunity that I think Putin will try and exploit. I don't think he's got the wherewithal to exploit it, but in his mind, he thinks he can do that. The deadline passes and there's no deal and the tariffs are imposed. I think Putin will very quickly try and get something on the table, and promise a peace talk and sit down and do something that he thinks will play into Donald Trump's hands. I don't think he can afford not to do that. And that's what Donald Trump is hoping for. I think Putin will be annoyed if he can't manage to achieve Trump elongating the deadline or ignoring it completely. But if Trump does ignore the deadline, he'll be seen as weak, and he knows he'll be seen as weak, and the Russians will exploit that even more. I don't think Putin will call the bluff. I don't think he'll come to the table, and I don't think he'll escalate. I think he'll play Trump. I think what he'll do is he'll try and identify something that he thinks will be acceptable to Trump. He will play this through a number of different channels. So he'll get some other global leaders that are Putin sympathizers to try and set the ground. So possibly some that are in the EU, possibly some that are in South America, part of BRICS and elsewhere. He'll try and get Xi Jinping from China to put a degree of subtle pressure on. If Xi Jinping is actually interested in doing it, he's out for himself, not out to support Russia per se. And he will then put something on the table to try and just get an elongation to the deadline. So there'll be an awful lot of focus on activity into the White House, activity to US diplomats, whether that be through embassies, through CIA agents, or direct contact, and otherwise through back doors to try and manipulate Donald Trump back onto Putin's piece of paper again. If Putin can't achieve that, well, life is going to get interesting. The Russian economy is teetering on the brink of collapsing at the moment. It's relying on the fact that it's a wartime economy and Putin is investing so much in its defense industry. But if we look at the state of its defense industry, we're hearing that 40% of the ammunition that's needed, the artillery shells that's needed by the Russians is coming from North Korea. I've seen North Korean equipment out on the front line in a number of videos. The Russian defense industrial base is not as strong as it makes it out to be, and we're seeing more oligarchs falling out of windows or committing suicide or other things, which suggests that there's a little bit of discontent going on in those oligarchs that underpin a lot of the political structures that are across Russia. I think Putin's probably got another 12 to 18 months of being able to ride this out before he's in serious trouble. And therefore, the EU members, whilst Russia is slowly vibrating apart, EU is slowly coming together, or the European Nato members are slowly coming together in a way that nobody would have ever thought this beforehand. In 50 days, Ukraine's not going to change the shape of the front line in the east. It's going to influence Russia deep inside Russia. So we're going to see increased drone attacks and possibly missile attacks against Russian command and control bases, logistic bases, airfields, but more importantly, their defense manufacturing sites, and possibly back to attacking. Hybrid warfare is something that Putin is continuing to prosecute throughout all of this, and that's targeted at all of us. So the principal area where he's having really good success is in the information domain. But it's not just about the war in Russia or between Russia and Ukraine. It's also about other conflicts around the world. So the Russians are heavily behind what we are seeing coming out of Iran, and Iran's pushing out in generating support in our different countries for Hamas, for the Palestinian cause, for Hezbollah, for the Houthis and everything else. They're stirring the pot. The Russians are brilliant at this, and they're working almost certainly with the Iranians to try and create this environment that's taking Western focus away from the Russia-Ukraine war. We'll see more cyber. Cyber's been going on continuously. They're looking for opportunities. If they can disrupt, they'll disrupt. And it's all about disruption. It's all about trying to cause as many different little problems around the world as you possibly can, so that our politicians are focusing on those little issues. And the more things they have to focus on, the more they the less time they've got to concentrate on what's going on between Putin and Zelensky and in Ukraine. So that's Putin's tactics. It's the old Chinese proverb, a death by 1,000 cuts. No one thing is significant, put them all together, and then it's causing a real problem.